My name is Grace Morrison, and I am 61 years old. I never raised my voice, never made a scene, never fired a single shot across the bow. Yet I destroyed them more completely than any war ever could. Silence, I learned, is the sharpest weapon. When Robert died 4 years ago, the world didn't stop. The sun still rose over the farmhouse we'd restored together, beam by beam, window by window. The chickens still needed feeding. The garden still demanded tending. And his family still came calling, but not to comfort me. We'd been married 38 years. We'd bought the derelict property when we were young and foolish and in love, spending weekends and evenings turning a crumbling wreck into something beautiful. Robert did the carpentry. I did the design and the painting. We planted an orchard together, 23 fruit trees that now stood mature and heavy with promise. The property was worth nearly $1 million by the time Robert's heart failed him on a Sunday morning in our bed. I held his hand as he went. His last words were, "It's all yours, Gracie, all of it." His daughter from his first marriage, Stephanie, arrived for the funeral in designer black, her husband trailing behind like an expensive shadow. I hadn't seen her in 6 years. She'd never forgiven Robert for divorcing her mother, even though that divorce happened before Stephanie could walk. His brother Paul came too, accompanied by his wife and their 2 sons. Paul had borrowed money from Robert a dozen times over the years. Robert never asked for it back. They were polite at the funeral, respectful. They hugged me with stiff arms and made appropriate condolence sounds. Then they waited exactly 2 weeks. Stephanie called first. "Grace, we need to talk about Dad's assets. I've consulted with a lawyer, and as his biological daughter, I have certain rights to the estate." I said nothing, just listened to her voice, sharp and entitled, explaining how the property should rightfully be divided, how I'd had my time with her father, how she deserved her inheritance. When she finished, I said quietly, "The will is clear, Stephanie. Everything comes to me." "We'll see about that." She hung up. I sat in the kitchen Robert and I had rebuilt, my tea growing cold, and made a decision. I would say nothing, do nothing, react to nothing. I would simply let them destroy themselves. Paul called next, his approach softer. "Grace, you know I loved my brother, and I know he'd want family taken care of. That property is too much for you to manage alone. Why don't we discuss selling it and splitting the proceeds fairly?" "No, thank you, Paul." "Grace, be reasonable." I hung up, gently, no drama, no argument, just a quiet disconnect. They filed a lawsuit 3 weeks later. Undue influence, they claimed, diminished capacity in Robert's final years. They painted me as a manipulator who'd isolated him from his real family. I hired a lawyer, a calm, methodical man named David Chen who specialized in estate law. At our first meeting, he asked how I wanted to proceed. "I want to say as little as possible," I told him. "Let them talk, let them perform, I'll just be quiet." He smiled slightly. That might be the smartest strategy I've heard all year. The depositions began. Stephanie performed beautifully, tears, outrage, memories of her beloved father who she'd barely visited. She spoke of how I'd stolen him from his family, how he'd changed after marrying me. My lawyer asked her one question. "When did you last visit your father?" It had been a while, I was busy." "How long?" "Maybe 6 years." Silence, just silence. No judgment, no commentary, just the truth hanging in the air like smoke. Paul's deposition was similar. He talked about brotherhood, about family bonds, about Robert's wishes. "Did Robert leave a will?" my lawyer asked. "Yes, but..." "Did it name Mrs. Morrison as sole beneficiary?" "Yes, but that's not..." "Thank you, no further questions." When my turn came, I dressed simply. No makeup beyond what I usually wore, no jewelry except my wedding ring. I sat with my hands folded and answered every question truthfully and briefly. "Did you love your husband?" "Yes." "Did you isolate him from his family?" "No, I invited them to every holiday, most declined." "Did you influence him to leave everything to you?" "No, he made that decision himself." I didn't elaborate, didn't defend, didn't explain, just stated facts in a voice barely above a whisper. The lawyer tried to rattle me, but you can't rattle silence. You can't argue with someone who won't engage. Meanwhile, I did something they never expected. Nothing. I didn't sell the property, didn't empty bank accounts, didn't make any suspicious moves. I simply lived exactly as Robert and I had lived, quietly, peacefully, tending the garden and the orchard, going to the farmer's market on Saturdays. I let them spend their money on lawyers, let them spiral into anxiety wondering what I was planning. Let them exhaust themselves with rage and strategy while I sat in my garden and drank tea. My silence drove them mad. Stephanie started calling, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. I never answered, never called back, just let her voice pour into the void. Paul showed up at my door twice. I saw him through the window and didn't answer. He knocked for 15 minutes before leaving. They started making mistakes. Stephanie's lawyer submitted documents claiming Robert had dementia in his final years. My lawyer quietly produced medical records showing Robert had been sharp as ever, signing legal documents and managing investments right up until his death. Paul claimed he'd been promised the orchard. My lawyer found emails where Robert had explicitly refused to sell it to him, calling Paul financially irresponsible. With each mistake, I said nothing, did nothing, just watched. The judge, an older man who'd probably seen 1,000 family squabbles, ruled after 6 months. The will is valid. The claims are without merit. Mrs. Morrison is the sole legal heir. The plaintiffs will pay all court costs and legal fees. Stephanie screamed at the courthouse, actually screamed. I sat quietly, hands folded, and said nothing. That was 2 years ago. I still live in the farmhouse. The orchard produced its best harvest last fall. I made 300 jars of preserves and sold them at the market. I've started teaching painting classes in the barn Robert converted into a studio. I host a quilting circle every Wednesday. Stephanie sent a letter 6 months ago, apologizing, asking if we could start over. I never responded. Paul lost his job last year. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd hoped to use his inheritance to pay off debts. Those debts are still there. They thought they could outshout, outmaneuver, outlegal a quiet widow. They never understood that silence isn't weakness. Silence is patience. Silence is watching your enemies defeat themselves while you do absolutely nothing. Silence is refusing to play a game you've already won. I'm 61 years old. I live in the house my husband and I built together. I tend our garden, harvest our orchard, paint in our studio. And I never think about them at all. That's the beautiful thing about silent revenge. You don't have to do anything except survive, thrive, and forget they ever existed. The silence, I gave them echoes louder than any words ever could.